Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu has gleefully accepted the route to ending the ceasefire Donald Trump has provided him with, stating unequivocally that unless the hostages are released by noon on Saturday the 15th of February, the ceasefire is going to end. Not that he's going to cop much of the blame, because the mass media have completely fixated on Hamas causing this, because they suspended hostage exchanges, something they did because Israel were violating the exchange deal, still committing atrocity, and Netanyahu was not engaging with phase 2 ceasefire talks. No intention of agreeing to them, so why bother send negotiators with a remit at all? And the complexioned crackpot, passing himself off as the US president, handed him an out by putting a clock on the end of the ceasefire if Hamas didn't release all their remaining 76 hostages in one go, handing over all of their leverage, so to speak. Even if they did, Israel would continue, of that I'm sure. Who would trust them enough to believe otherwise? But it is blowing up in Netanyahu's face royally. And it's happening all the more now as Hamas have, breaking news, said they're now going to resume the hostage releases as of this Saturday. Netanyahu might have thought this got him off the hook, but both domestically and beyond, it is being seen as a self-serving, massive escalation that won't be forgotten.
חבר הכנסת להב הרצנו, קריאה שנייה. חבר הכנסת להב הרצנו, אתה בקריאה שנייה. חבר הכנסת להב הרצנו, קריאה שלישית, נא לצאת. תודה רבה. חבר הכנסת מלביצקי. חבר הכנסת מלביצקי. חבר הכנסת מלביצקי, קריאה ראשונה. נא להוציא את חבר הכנסת להב הרצנו, תודה. לא לעזור לי מהצד הזה, לא לעזור. חברת הכנסת בן ארי, די.
Right, so, scenes from the Knesset there, erupting in fury as Netanyahu yet again abandons his own people. The hostages Hamas still hold in favour of keeping himself in power. All of this has followed a statement Netanyahu gave where he said that if Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday at noon, the ceasefire will end, and the Israeli army will return to intensive fighting until Hamas is completely defeated. Netanyahu says that following Hamas's announcement to postpone the release of the Israeli captives, he also instructed the Israeli army to gather in and around the Gaza Strip. He adds that this action is taking place at this hour. It will be completed soon. Watching those scenes of members of the Knesset being removed, though, you have to bear in mind that Israel gets referred to as the only democracy in the Middle East, doesn't it? Yet in what way is it democratic to remove the elected representatives of the Israeli people from the Israeli parliament for giving Netanyahu the treatment? Of course, to stay in power, we know Netanyahu had no other option. Trump gave him an out, which saw him able to placate his right-wing coalition partners in the religious Zionism party, so they wouldn't collapse his government. And no doubt when atrocities resume on Saturday, because I cannot see any way of avoiding it, sadly, even with this breaking news that Hamas are going to go ahead with hostage releases, we'll see Netanyahu's government bolstered in strength again as, I don't know, Itamar Ben-Gvir and his Otzma Yehudit party likely return to government as well. Netanyahu has been joined in his opinings now by his deranged defence minister Israel Katz as well, who spoke to Israeli news outlet Maariv. Speaking from the Operation Directorate's command centre, Israeli War Minister Israel Katz warned that if Hamas does not release Israeli captives by Saturday, the gates of hell will open on them, just as the US president promised, vowing that the new Gaza war will be different in intensity and will not end without the defeat of Hamas and the release of all the hostages. Katz emphasised that the ceasefire deal was solely to secure the hostages' release, stating if Hamas stops releasing the hostages, then there is no agreement and there is war. He also suggested that the renewed offensive would facilitate the realisation of US President Trump's vision regarding Gaza. All very worrying in spite of this breaking news that Hamas are going to go ahead with hostage releases on Saturday now. That might have caught them off guard here. But quite what Katz means by varying in intensity, that remains to be seen, given that he seems to spend every waking hour creating dissent in the ranks of the IDF, already short-handed as they are. However, one worrying change to how Israel may go about matters came from who else but Bezalel Smotrich, the hard-right finance minister who is really in charge in Israel right now, who has said, according to Middle East Eye, that Israeli far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich has said Hamas should be threatened with a gradual annexation of the Gaza Strip should any Israeli captives be harmed. The way to protect the captives is to inform Hamas that for every one of ours kidnapped, God forbid, if something happens to them, we will apply sovereignty to 5% of the Gaza Strip on that day, Smotrich said, speaking at the Institute for Haredi Strategy and Policy on Monday. Another kidnapped, another 5%. Another kidnapped, another 5%. We have backup for that. Smotrich hinted that US President Donald Trump endorses the idea, adding that they should also cut off the flow of humanitarian aid to the war-torn Palestinian enclave. Taking more and more land illegally is his answer until, what, you squeeze all the people out, or worse? It is talk of action like this that is bringing the most condemnation right now, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Upsetting political enemies of opposition party members in the Knesset is one thing though, but outside of Israel, it's looking bad for Netanyahu given what he's doing and what others in his government are clearly saying. There has, as this channel has been covering, a lot of news coming out of both Jordan and Egypt in response to them being forced to take people from Gaza who are going to be ethnically cleansed under Trump's plans. Perhaps dragging people from the Gaza Strip is the shift that Katz talks about, even as Egypt and Jordan say, no, we're not doing it. Though Jordan has agreed to take 2,000 sick children from Gaza, a humanitarian response rather than a full rollover in my view, but others may think differently. Now, Egypt, as we know now, have cancelled talks with Trump and their President Sisi should any discussion of Egypt taking Gazans out of Gaza be put on the table. Sisi isn't prepared to go through the humiliation King Abdullah of Jordan did. But given Smotrich's comment particularly, and knowing Israel tried to annex northern Gaza previously under the general's plan, it seems logical to assume that any annexation plan would run north to south to meet at the Egyptian border, the permanent seizure of the Philadelphia corridor, the Rafah border crossing, and the peace accords violation that would end up being. Egypt having thus far said very little of Israel temporarily controlling that corridor, which was also a violation of the accords. Though with all the talk of Gazans being forced into Egypt, Sisi has now parked Egyptian tanks on their side of that border, a menacing sight for any IDF troops who might resume control of that corridor, currently controlled by their skivvies and the Palestinian Authority. Egypt have taken a discernibly tougher line now, apparently. Reports by Al-Arabi Al-Jadid indicate that Egyptian military officials have cautioned Israel that any violation of the Camp David Accords would result in a proportional response from Egypt. Egyptian sources have also warned that US President Donald Trump's plan to expel Palestinians from Gaza jeopardizes the Camp David peace accords, and that any step towards implementing it would constitute as a violation. Israel's former deputy ambassador to Egypt, Ruth Wasserman Lande, on Monday characterized Cairo's recent threat to annul the Camp David Accords as significant, but expressed doubt that an immediate cancellation would occur. Speaking to Gadi Ness on Radio North 104.5 FM, she stated, "I wouldn't hastily assume an imminent cancellation, though the latest developments are substantial." She noted that Egypt is currently conducting military exercises with Israel as the reference scenario and deploying forces in the Sinai Peninsula. Lande emphasised that Israel's request for clarification isn't hysteria, but rather a measured evaluation of a real military build-up that requires clarification. Sisi is not one known for taking tough action on Israel, but more and more his hand is being forced, and if he values his own position, he cannot allow himself to be pushed much further. But as much as this news from Egypt might raise eyebrows and have people wondering if Sisi finally has had enough, or is verging that way, his comments aren't the most surprising to come out since Netanyahu's announcement. Syria's new interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, says that US President Donald Trump's plans to expel Palestinians from Gaza is a serious crime and will ultimately fail, in an interview with British podcast The Rest is Politics. Al-Shara said that despite enduring over 80 years of destruction and killing, Palestinians have refused to leave their land, and that it would not be wise or morally or politically right to force them to leave. He added, "Why is he pushing Mexicans out of America now? He is doing the same thing. I believe this is a serious crime that will ultimately fail." Late last year, Shara addressed Israel for the first time, condemning the Israeli army's incursions into Syrian territories. He also pledged that the downfall of the Assad regime had ended what Israel claims was the threat of Iran-backed armed groups. Now, I have no time for the podcast in question there, run by a former Tory MP and Tony Blair's Iraq WMD dossier fiddler. And it is notable that al-Shara chose to target Trump in regards to ethnic cleansing of Gaza and not Israel directly. Yet still, coming out on the side of the Palestinians is not something that will gain his Syria any favour with Israel itself, something he has been constantly chasing, it seems, since he became unelected president? Is al-Sharaf finally coming around to the realization Israel may not actually be his friend? I won't go that far yet, but maybe he is being nudged in that direction given everything that is happening. We will see, I guess. As I was writing this news, of course, it broke that news was that Hamas have now said they're going to release more hostages on Saturday as per the original terms of phase 1 of the ceasefire agreement. But with Trump and now Netanyahu having ordered the release of all remaining hostages, this may not be enough now, knowing Netanyahu needs to end the ceasefire for his own political survival. He may go anyway. He may dump it anyway. That said, it does switch the focus for the end of the ceasefire back onto Netanyahu and Trump, forcing them to now own it themselves, though I somehow doubt the mainstream media is going to spell it out quite like that. Meanwhile, as for Jordan, I covered the fallout of that both for their King Abdullah and for Trump and Israel in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. It's not going at all Israel's way in my view, and for those who have been slamming Jordan outright for their response, now King Abdullah dealt with Trump, all is not necessarily as it seems. But before you pop off to watch that or something else, please do hit like, share and subscribe so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as help support the channel going forwards, all very much appreciated as that is. And I will hopefully therefore catch you on the next feed. Cheers folks.